Everyone. Over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of questions about authentication with Cortex, why to set it up, how to set it up, different network topology scenarios. And in this video, I wanted to clear up some of the questions, some of the more common questions that I've been getting. Uh, but before we get into it, I want to remind you all that every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, we host what we call the Cortex Users Group. Um, and one of the things that we do there is answer questions like this. It's a time when you can come with any questions you have about Cortex, whether you are just investigating Cortex and thinking about using it, or you're actively setting it up, or you're actively using it and you have other questions about other things that it can do, or maybe your users have questions about how to use it. It's an opportunity for you to ask us all of those questions. You can also ask your peers, right? Anyone who also shows up, who is also anywhere along those along that journey. And it's really intended to be for the community. That's 10 a.m. Pacific time every Tuesday. There's a link down in the description to get an invite to that. If you don't want the kind of the in-person, it's virtual, but the in-person experience, or maybe the time doesn't work for you, we also have a Discord server. There's a link down in the description for that as well. Exactly the same sort of setup. You can ask any questions that you have about Cortex. But again, in this video, we're going to talk specifically about authentication and single sign-on. Some of the things that uh, impact how you might configure Cortex and why you might configure Cortex a specific way. Um, and let's start right off with why even configure authentication at all. Um, Cortex does have an authentication type of none, which basically means that everyone is automatically authenticated as an administrator. They have access to everything, right? So is that sufficient for you? Maybe it is. We don't recommend that strategy for production for a couple different reasons, but it is there. And you could certainly use it. One use case is if you handle authentication, a layer in front. You have a reverse proxy and you authenticate at the reverse proxy. So only certain users are allowed to see. Anyone who is allowed to see Cortex is allowed to see everything. So you don't need to do additional authentication at the Cortex layer. But in most cases, you do want to do some sort of authentication for Cortex for a couple different reasons. The first reason is, of course, to ensure that only valid users are allowed to see data, right? Truly authentication, right? And the other reason is authorization, making sure that a user who logs in is only allowed to see the things that they are supposed to have access to, right? Because logging everyone in as an admin means that they have access to everything. Most of the people in your organization didn't have access to everything in Cherwell, so they probably shouldn't have access to everything in Cortex. One of the advantages of hooking up Cortex with an authentication mechanism is that once we know who is actually logged in, who is actually authenticated, we can map that user to their security group that they had in Cherwell, and they're allowed to see the things that they were allowed to see in Cherwell. There is a specific configuration where if their role changes, for instance, let's say they move from IT to HR and they are now allowed to see a bunch more stuff. They need to be able to see all of the HR stuff. You can actually change their security group. It doesn't change it in the Cherwell database. It changes it in a specific Cortex area that configures that mapping between their user and that new security group. Without having an authentication mechanism in place, you wouldn't be able to do that. So that's the main reason. Those two reasons are the main reasons that setting up authentication is important with Cortex. Now, we made a decision very early on in the development of Cortex that we weren't going to support, or we weren't going to implement an internal authentication mechanism. A couple different reasons for that. And actually, on top of that, we also weren't going to support the Cherwell internal authentication mechanism. Uh, Again, a few different reasons for that. One is that most people, most organizations using Cherwell, I would say all of them, most likely, didn't use internal Cherwell authentication. That was great for a demo mode, and we have something for a demo mode. We have the authentication type of none, which we feel is sufficient for a demo mode. Um, but most organizations used Windows Auth, LDAP, SAML, or I guess that those were the only options, right? Um, Now, we don't support Windows right now. That's actually in the works. But in Cortex 2.0, Windows Auth is not supported. We don't support LDAP um, for other reasons. Significant complexity came with that. And as far as we can tell, most organizations didn't use LDAP. Most organizations are either using Windows Auth or SAML. And if they were using Windows Auth, most of the time, most of those organizations, even if they were using Auth when they started using Cherwell, they might even still be using Windows Auth now. Most organizations are using uh, either Azure AD or the kind of hybrid. You have a local domain controller and it's mirrored to Azure. So you have access to Azure AD, the Azure ID, SAML setup. So basically, every organization who is using Cherwell today has the ability to use SAML. So us supporting SAML supports virtually all organizations using Cherwell. We also support OpenID Connect because some auth providers, some SSO providers support both SAML and OpenID Connect. And if your organization is trying to shift to OpenID Connect, we wanted to support that as well. We also implemented that first because that was something that felt natural to us. But we realized that SAML was actually pretty easy to add on. So we did that and made it super easy to use SAML. And actually, now we recommend SAML for everything. We use SAML internally, even though we started with OpenID Connect. The SAML connector, it really couldn't be easier to get it set up and get it set up correctly. It's not nearly as painful as getting it configured with Cherwell was. So we definitely recommend using SAML, using SSO with whatever provider you have. And we actually have documentation. I'm going to share my screen real quick. We have documentation on several different SAML providers. Of course, ADFS, like Cherwell, supported. And I think most of the documentation was always about using SAML with ADFS. Cherwell also supported something called Shibboleth. Um, though at that point, I haven't seen a whole lot of movement around that product, that platform. But there are several other platforms that have kind of taken its place. Obviously, we support Azure AD, and more recently, we've supported Okta and Google Workspace. All of these different platforms work a little bit differently, which is why we have separate installations or separate configuration instructions for each platform. Um, there are realistically, there are more similarities between them than there are differences. But since authentication is hard and it's really easy to get something wrong, and when you get something wrong, the error messages can be super cryptic, we found it easier just to have a separate configuration document for each platform. Now, we do support other platforms. Internally, we actually use something called Keycloak. There's another one out there called Authentic. That's Authentic with a K at the end. Um, and plenty of others. Since SAML is a standard, all of them support SAML 2.0, which is what Cherwell used, and that's what Cortex uses as well. Um, all of them will connect with Cortex. We have folks using all of the four listed here. We also have folks using other platforms. Um, perfectly successfully. If you have particular questions about the platform that you're using, and we're certainly more than happy to answer those questions. And my recommendation is that there's probably someone at your organization who has done this with other applications, maybe does this on a regular basis, and handles your authentication, your authorization needs. That might be called access control or identity and access management. The team might have a different name, but there's someone in your organization who's responsible for this sort of thing and is familiar enough with the process that they can look at these four examples that we have here, find the one that most closely mirrors what they're used to doing, and it's probably step for step identical. If it's not, if you run into issues, that's always something that we can support you with. Both us directly, or if you're working with any of our partners, they can help you through that as well. They might call us as well. Authentication can be hard. Those error messages can be cryptic, um, but we actually have a lot of configuration options in Cortex. Wow, my camera got really blurry all of a sudden. A lot of configuration options to make that uh, line up, whatever needs to happen. If the username isn't getting passed across properly, we can make sure that Cortex understands what your SSO provider is providing. And I'm trying to get the blurriness to go away, and it's not working. That's okay because I'm pretty much at the end of the video. So I'm going to stop right now and remind you that if you have other questions, oh, and now it's not blurry anymore. If you have any other questions, come to the Cortex users group. Again, link down in the video description. Come visit us on Discord. If you have any other questions about authentication, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, or come to any of those places. Check out our documentation. Let us know. Happy to support you through it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.